Aleph, Bava Basra. A quick recap of what we had so far. In the Mishnah, we had a machlekes in these crypts. They used to bury the people. They had these caves. They have this little courtyard that was depressed. Some say it was the same level as the actual cavities in the wall. Some say it's a bit higher up, then you had to go down. But regardless, there's an argument in the Mishnah how long the wall was on the side. We establish, everyone agrees that each coffin or each cavity was 1 amma wide, and everyone agrees that between the distance between one cavity and the next was also 1 amma wide. And the Rishonim here say the reason is to make sure that it doesn't collapse, that these walls don't collapse. So one opinion says that the length of the wall was 6 ammas, which basically means that you can bury 3 people on the length of the wall, the 2 sides, because each mace took up an amma. That's 3 ammas. The gaps in between, with 2 gaps in between, each is an amma, that makes it 5 ammas. And then you have a half an amma on each side to extend to the end of the wall. And the wall against the entrance, the width of the wall was only 4 ammas wide, which means you can only have 2 people buried there, 2 ammas, and an amma in between is 3.5 an amma on each side. That was the opinion of the Tanna Kama. Rav Shimon disagrees. He says the length of the wall was actually 8 ammas, and the width of the wall was 6. So on the sides, you could have 4 people buried, and straight ahead you have 3 people buried. That was the argument we had in the Mishnah. Then we brought down another Mishnah here, which says that if you found a corpse lying around, there's a big difference if it's part of a cemetery or if it's just an individual corpse. If it's an individual corpse, we say as follows. If the body is cut up, we'll say that it was probably murdered, fell down over here, does not acquire the place at all. You pick up the body and you move it somewhere else, and you don't take any sand with it. If it's not lying in the Jewish way, for example, the head between the knees, we'll assume it's a goy. You don't have to worry about it. If it was lying in the proper way, so if it's only 1 or 2 bodies that you found, we say it's not a beis hakorish. It was probably put there temporarily, an intention to move it somewhere else. So you move it, but you take also est tfusasa. You take the sand around it. Machlekes and halacha and rishonim, whether you take the depth of 3 fingers or you take the depth of 3 tvachim. And machlekes is the reason why, but one of the reasons is we say that part of the body decomposed and maybe got absorbed into the sand. And okay, so that part is all right. But then it says if you found 3 bodies within a certain area, we can maybe assume that it's a crypt. And therefore you have to look at the other walls and the other sides, see where they are. But the Mishnah here says, if you found 3 bodies between 4 ammas and 8 ammas, that means if it's 4 ammas, it could be it's the width of the wall, and if it's 8 ammas, it could be it's the length of the wall. So then you have to continue searching to see what's going on here. You have to search. You have no idea what you found. Let's say, did you find the width of the wall, or did you find the length and you didn't, and the last body wasn't yet buried? So you have to look at each other side to see whether there's bodies there. And then how do you know which side to look? So you have to look at the right side, you have to look at the left side. You search for 20 ammas. You search a distance of 20 ammas, you found a lone body. So normally a lone body means nothing. But because you found over here on one side of the crypt some bodies, and you found 20 ammas, another one, could be that's the other side of this crypt. Or even if it's not the other side, maybe you started a new crypt over there. So therefore, you have to continue searching in all different directions. That's more or less what the Mishnah says, except then we had, so now we're going to analyze it. Amamar, we learned, this is 6 lines on the top of the page. We learned, Ma'arbe va'at shmoina. It says that if you found 3 bodies together, either starting from 4 ammas, which means then you'll say it must be the back wall, or till 8 ammas. 8 ammas is the length. Now, nobody holds 4 and 8. If it's the Rabbanan, they say 4 was the width of the wall, and 6 was the length. If it's Rav Shimon, he says 6 ammas was the width, and 8 was the length. Nobody says 4 to 8. So what's going on here? Says who's the author of that opinion? If it's the Rabbanan, they say if you found 3 bodies within Dal Amaz Hashesh. If you found 3 bodies, the width would be 4 ammas, the length is 6 ammas. 6 by 8. Nobody says 4 by 8. So more answers Rav Shimon. But there's another view what Rav Shimon holds, and that view is the following. This following Tanya is what learned the following another argument Matzon Ritzufin, you found the bodies one on top of the other. They're all very closely sandwiched together. The Ein Beineyen, and you don't have Medalad Amas Va'atches. You don't have from the beginning until the end 4 Amas or 8 Amas. So in this case over here, we say Yesh Lahen Tfusa. We'll say even though you have more than 3 bodies here, but because they're all compressed together in less than 4 Amas, we will say that they it will treat them like individual people who died there, and only temporarily, because not a cemetery. We're going to remove them, relocate them. So we take the sand with it. So yesh lahen tfusa, we take the tfusa with it, and the ein lahen shchunas kavaras, and they don't have the din of a cemetery. Okay, which is what we learned before. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, Rab Shimon. That Rab Shimon ben Yehuda said, name Rab Shimon ben Yehuda. Royin es ha'emtzayim kil einon. If you have all of these bodies together, we'll say the following. Really, it's only 3 bodies within, 4 amas or 8 amas. But we are going to say that the middle ones is as if they're non-existent. They were just put in there very temporarily until they find the right place, and then something happened, they couldn't come back. We'll imagine the ones in between as if they don't exist. And Mahashar mitzdarfin, and the rest then we combine middalas vadches. The rest we combine between 4 and 8 amas. So what do we see from here clearly? That both of these opinions hold it's between 4 and 8. The only question is, do we imagine the bodies sandwiched in between are disappearant, non-existent, or not? So that's the view of the Mishnah we just mentioned before. 4 to 8 is all Epshivin. Okay, says the Gemara. Let's now understand the Mishnah. The Maya Kimta, how did you learn the Mishnah on top of the page? Rab Shimon. You said that the author is Rab Shimon because he says 8 amas and he says 4, and you decided based on this other brisa here that Rab Shimon is the one who holds that the width of the wall is 4 amas and the length of the wall is 8 amas. Okay, there's a view in Rab Shimon who says that. But let me ask you a question. Ema Sefer, the Mishnah on top of the page, it said there, Boide Kemena, you found over here these bodies. You have to now check all around, and it says you check Ulahalan Esimama, 20 amas. Now let's think for a second. According to the Rabbanon, the length of the wall is 6 amas. And we know that the length of the yard where they met and convened with the Aron and the people who were escorting the Aron is 6 amas. So if you have the length of the wall on both sides, and you have the chutzah middle, it's only 18 amas. So according to the Rabbanon, you found the dead body. You have to go the other, because maybe that's the end of the crypt. You have to go the other direction up to 18 amas, not 20. If you follow Rab Shimon says that the length of the wall is 8 amas. So if you have 8, 6, and 8, that's 22 amas. According to Rab Shimon, you should be searching up to 22 amas. Why did it say 20? And you said that the author here is Rab Shimon. It doesn't work out. The Gemara asks, the Mayu Kimta Rab Shimon Ema Sefer. Read the next part of the Mishnah where it says Boidik Hey Men Ol Hali. Check from there onwards. Esim Amma 20 Amma. Mani. Who is that? Rab Shimon. If it's Rab Shimon, Esrim V'Tartin Amma is 22. Because the length of the wall is 8, so you have 2 walls on both sides, right? The flank, the chutz on both sides, right and left. So that's 8 to 16. The chutz itself is 6 Ammas, so you have to be concerned that maybe up to 22 Ammas. And Rabbanon, you can tell me, oh, this is not Rab Shimon. Maybe the second case of the Mishnah, we go back to the Rabbanon. So the first part is Rab Shimon, 4 to 8. And the second part that says 20 amas Rabbanon, it doesn't work out either. Tamni Serehavin, it should only be 18. The Rabbanon hold the length of the wall 6, 6, and 6, and 6. The Chatzar is 6, and the other side of the wall is 6, it's 18. Says the Gemara, La'olam Rabbanani, it's the Rabbanon. Ukegoin de Bodak Ba'alach. You went ahead and you went diagonally. If you want to really have an idea, if there are more mace in there, you can't go in a straight line. What happens if one mace is tall and one mace is short? So you're at the very end of the mace. You walk, and then you walk. You don't see anything else because maybe the other mace are much shorter and they're pressed in, and maybe their holes are a bit pressed in. So the only way to really investigate it properly is by going diagonally. And the Rashbam makes a calculation here, which Tesis finds hard to understand. But I'll just tell you what Rashbam says. He says the diagonal of 6 by 4 is the same as the diagonal of 5 by 5. He says 6 by 4 is 24, square arm is 5 by 5 is 25, and therefore he says the diagonal of 5 by 5, remember the diagonal is 1 2/5, so that adds 2 more amas. That adds 2 more amas, but because it's 6 amas, so you add 2 to the 6. Length is 6, you add 2 to the 6, becomes Therefore, you have someone can mute themselves. So therefore,
turn your computer mic off, please.
Okay, so let me just quick say it again. The Rashbam says that even though the walls are, let's say, you have a 6x4, we'll assume that a 6x4 is almost the same as a 5x5, because it's almost the same area. And the diagonal of a 5 is 1 2/5. Remember, 3.14 the Chacham generally use 1 2/5. 1 2/5 of 5 is 2 amos, which makes it 7. But you add the 2 spare amos to the length of the wall, which is 6. Remember, it's 6x4. So 2 plus 6 is 8. So even according to the Chachamim, you get 8 amos on one of the walls. So you have 8, then 6, and then the left you also look only 6. So the obvious, so that total is 20. So Gemara can ask a question. If you're supposed to look diagonally, so just like on the right side, for example, you're going diagonally, on the left side also you should go diagonally, which is also another 8. So according to Rabban also should be 22, not 20. Ask the Gemara. If you go, let's say, on the right side and you're going looking on a diagonal, is Hanami Balachsaina. The other side also should be diagonal. Esim V'Tarta Havin should be 22. Says the Gemara, the whole thing is the Chum. So we look in one side in a Lachsan. And if you don't find there that it's a Beis HaKvaris, then Trei Balachsamin, you don't have to be Machmed on the other side. Also, you have to go diagonally. You can go there in a straight line. Says the Gemara further. That's one answer. Rav Shisha, B'rei Ravidi Yama, which we had before. Rav Shisha, the son of Ravidi says, La'oil Rav Shimon. Let's go back to Rav Shimon, who holds 8, 6, 8. So the Chayda is 22. Why is it only 8? Only 20 here. We're talking about here. You found nefla. You found over here little miscarriages, fetuses, and there the cavities are much smaller, so they don't need so much space. So instead of being that area, instead of being 8 amos long, the wall was only 6 amos to get your 4 mason. So one side had miscarriages, so therefore it's 6, 6, and 8. Says the Gemara, if one side are basically fetuses, maybe the other side is also fetuses. So if it's fetuses, then it's only 6 amos along the wall because they're much smaller cavities, and the aura is much smaller as well. So 6 on one side, 6 on the other side, and 6 in the middle is 18. So we answer how many miscarriages there was? One side they buried all the following, or they buried all the fetuses, but not the other side. So one side was 6, the center was 6, and the other side was 8, and that's how you get to 20. Says the Gemara, the last thing you learned, you brought a brisa, and this brisa said that if they're sort of sandwiched together, the one brisa says, well, it's not a Beis HaKvaris. Obviously, the whole thing is temporary. The other brisa said, the other opinion says the name of Shimon Yochai. We imagine the middle ones are taken out. They were just put there for temporarily. You imagine taken out, and you have a Beis HaKvaris. So we're going to find another argument, totally unrelated, where Rav Shimon says you don't imagine it's taken out, and the Chachamim say you do imagine it's taken out. Exactly the opposite opinions as to what they have here. And what's the story there? Says the Gemara, Rami, I have a problem with Rabbanan against the Rabbanan. Here they say that we don't imagine that the dead bodies are missing, and therefore they say it's not a cemetery. And yet somewhere else they say we do imagine. And the Rami, the Rav Shimon, well, that's the question of Rav Shimon. The din is if you have individual vines, you're not allowed to grow climb, you're not allowed to grow wheat, let's say, next to the vine. You have to distance 1 amma. But if it's a vineyard, and we learned a few times when a vineyard is, you have like a 2 and 2 and then 1 on the end of the tail. But if it's a vineyard, if we treat it like a vineyard, then you have to distance 4 amos, enough that you can have bring all your implements to harvest the grapes. So, perem hanetua al pachas ma'arba amos. So if you have a vineyard that is growing in an area less than 4 amos, right? It's from one vine to the next vine, you should be like a 4 amos distance to make a vineyard, but you have vines that are closer to each other than 4 amos apart. Says Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says, "Eina kedem." Well, it's not a vineyard because you don't have space between one. You need 4 amos space around each vine, and here you've grown the vines very close to each other, closer than 4 amos. So I don't treat it like a vineyard, right? And we don't imagine that the rows in between are going to be pulled out. We look at it the way it is. It's standing there. It's not a vineyard. And the Chachamim, I mean, it's a tree like a vineyard. The roin, and we imagine the middle row, kila ein, as if it's non-existent. So here the Rabbanan say, you imagine the middle row is non-existent. When it comes to finding all these bodies there, the corpses, it says, no, leave it as it is. It's too crowded. It's not a basic verse. You don't imagine it's taken out. And Rav Shimon is the converse. Says the Gemara, Kashe the Rabbanan, the Kashe, Rav Shimon answers the Gemara. The Rav Shimon at Rav Shimon Kashe. Here, how come by Keder Rav Shimon says we don't imagine you pull it out, and how come by the corpses it does? He says very simple. Hasam loin noti incha daitalaka. When they planted the vines, the plan was it should grow grapes. You had no intention of removing it, and therefore we don't imagine it's been pulled out. Hacha, in the case of the bodies, the reason why I imagine that it doesn't belong there, take it out, because it's quite possible, zimnin, sometimes, on occasion, the misrami leben hashmasha, somebody passed away Friday right before Shabbos, umikri, and it happened to manchle. You had no choice. They put the dead body there temporarily. So therefore, we can imagine it doesn't belong there. It's out of place. If you take it out, then you have a normal Beis HaKvaros. And the Rabbanan Nami Kasha, they hold exactly that. Over here, when it comes to dead bodies, Kivan, the maneuver, the way they're lying right now, it's so inappropriate, is like mikra kaven. I cannot call this a cemetery. This is not a cemetery. They all should be relocated. But Hossam, when it comes to the vineyard, I imagine we pull out the rows that don't give them enough space to work with. You know why? Because Maimon Amar, I believe that the farmer who planted it says, Hai menayu de shaper, those vines that grow well, I will retain. With the light shaper, lehevi letzibin, those that don't grow well, I am going to remove. Hadan aloch ha-meicher ha-peidah. So we're continuing to learn the laws of sales, what's included, and what you can expect. If you don't really expect 100% to be exactly what you ordered, but even you allow a certain tolerance for inferior quality, and we learned till now, in each situation, how much are you prepared to accept? So now we continue. Someone said to his friend, base koir offer ani moichlach. I'm going to sell you a base koir. A base koir is 30 saw. Just to remind you, 30 saw. A saw is 50 by 50 amos. The Mishkan was 2 saw, sasayim, which is 100 by 50. So a saw is 50 by 50, which is 2,500 square amos. If 30 saw means 30 times 50 by 50, or 1,500 amos by 50 amos, or 75,000 square amos.
Goodness.
And he said, offer, I'm going to sell you sand. And I'm going to sell you sand, which means that I can use its soil. So I can use the entire lot to plant. And what happened? And the problem was parts of the land you couldn't use. Hayusham nikoyim amukim. There were deep clefts in the ground, big holes. Asara tvachim, 10 tvachim deep, which is very significant. It's like in a way, it's like a separate property. Craters in the land. Oisloyim, or boulders, gevoyin tvachim. They were 10 tvachim high. And Hilchos Shabbos, 10 tvachim makes it like a separate domain. Einon nimdodin ima. It does not get included with it. In other words, you didn't give me 30 saw. I want 30 saw of land with soil, and you gave me holes there, which I cannot plant. I cannot use it, or even I will see later in the Gemara. It's like I have to work on 2 different properties, and I only want 1 property, and therefore, give me another piece of land. We're talking about in a general case where he said, "I'm going to sell you land 30 saw or a base coat of good soil." And here I'm not getting my 30 saw of good soil. Therefore, you got to give me another piece of land, another tract of land. Now, the Rashbam adds that it has to be 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide, 10 tfachim deep, 10 tfachim high. But we learn from Hilchos Shabbos, in order for an area to be considered significant, it has to be a minimum of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. So it's like a separate domain, and it's like I have to now plow 2 fields. I have my field above, and then I got to go down to another domain and plow there. I don't want 2 fields. I only want 1. Okay. Then the word continues. What about pachas mikan? What about less than 10 tfachim high or less than 10 tfachim deep? Then nimdodin ima. You have to expect. You can't have 30 saw, such a large tract of land, and everything is perfect soil. You expect there's some rocks around the place. And the Gemara will tell us later how much we tolerate in proportion to 30 saw. Says the Gemara further. The im amalei, if he told him kibes could offer, if he told him, I'm going to sell you something approximately a base card, didn't say exactly base card, and he's saying here, this land over here, it's like a base card, whatever it is, there is. Then we say, even there were deep craters there, holes or pits, they all get included. They all get included there. Why? Because by me saying kid based card, in other words, the by me saying kid based coir, I'm saying that I'm adding something, even though I said offer, so it has to be good soil. I'm saying that this, okay, we'll see later in the Gemara, the measure is 4 kavin, the equivalent of 4 kavin to 30 saw. A saw has 6 kavin. 30 saw would then have 180 kavin. We tolerate a ratio of 4 kavin to 180, which is roughly like 2.2%. So we tolerate up to 4 kavin, and no more. But if I said kibesa, then even and we said before that if there was a big hole, but there are boulders and holes that were 10 tefachim deep, they're not accepted at all. But if I said kibesa, then it includes even boulders and holes, but again, up to 4 kavin, and no more than that. Okay, says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. That's how we learned in a Mishnah when it comes to Hegdish. Amagdish Sadeu. B'shas Hayevel, if somebody makes his field Hegdish in the year of Yevel, we know there's 2 kinds of fields. We have a Zdei Achuzah and we have a Zdei Mikna. A stay mikna is a field that I sell. If I donate that field to, I bought a field, I donated to Hegdish. If I want to redeem it, I have to pay the full value, whatever it is. But if it's a stay achuzah, an inherited field that I donated to Hegdish, and I want to redeem it, the Torah tells you pay 50 shkolim for an area. 50 shkolim for, if you plant barley in that particular area, and then you work it out, calculate how many years are left to Yovel, and that's how much you pay. And so therefore, this din of Zdei Achuzah only applies when the years of Yovel still apply. And according to Rashi and Eichel, it's the first base of Mikdash. Basically, there argues even the second. Okay. So we're talking about that you makdish your Zdei Achuzah in the years when Yovel was operating. Noisel, if you want to redeem it, you have to give lebei zera chaymer sa'odim chamisha shekel kesef. That you have to pay according to this calculation of 50 shkolim, is 49 years, so it's 1 shekel and 1 pundian, and in other words, and that's the size of a base koyer. In other words, you imagine 30 saw. If you have 30 saw or 60 saw, for each 30 saw, you pay these, calculate based on this 50 shkolim for 49 years. There's 10 years left till Yovel, you want to redeem it, so you pay, based on that, and you deduct all the other years that went by. Then it says here, what happens in this property that you consecrated? It has these massive holes or these boulders. Ein nimdodin ima. It doesn't get redeemed with it. It doesn't get redeemed with it because why? Because since you cannot plant in those holes, you cannot plant in those boulders. And the reason why you cannot plant, the Gemara will soon explain, because there was water inside them. So therefore, the only way you can redeem it is paying the full value. It's not considered this day achuzah, that you could have planted for yourself. For the rock, for the boulder, if it's 10 tefachim high, or for the hole, it's 10 tefachim below, you want to redeem that separate. You have to redeem it separately, and there you pay the full value. And you learn that from a different sukkah. Let's the Gemara further. But any less than that, nimdodin ima. If there are holes or boulders less than that, then they do get redeemed together with it. The question is, likacha ba'anpei. Why don't they get? Why don't they redeem in a separate way? Why don't we treat it like 2 separate fields? And you can redeem. If I donate 2 fields to the base of Mikdash, I can redeem 1 field today and another field tomorrow. So you're telling me that a hole in the ground or a boulder is considered like a separate field. Fine. So let me redeem my regular field, and then separately I'll redeem the boulder. Why do you say that? No, you cannot redeem at all. You got to pay the full value. You can't use the same calculation of 50 shekalim. Why not? Says the Gemara, why can't you treat it as a separate field and redeem it separately? Says the Gemara, if you can tell me. Maybe the reason is keeping the lahavi base card. The Torah says this calculation of 50 shkalim is for the size of a chayma, which is 30 saw, which is the base card. Because this boulder or this hole in the ground is not equal itself in its own right as a base card, therefore you cannot redeem it. Maybe that's shot. Says the Gemara, since it's not a base card, you cannot redeem it. How can it be? But Tanya, we learned Sada. It says in the pasuk an extra word Sada when it talks about redeeming it. And with the Gemara over there wants to know why does it say Sada again? Because it says in the pasuk Zera if you have 30 saw, you redeem it 50 shkalim if you have 49 years to go. Ainly, all I know is shehikdish be'inyan hazeh. Only if I know if you're makdish consecrated a large tract of land, 30 saw. Menayin l'rabbis l'soch. How do I know if I only makdish 15 saw, or chatzi l'soch, or 7.5 saw, or even just 1 saw? And then you calculate proportional. If 50 saw is equal of 30 saw, then 1 saw is a 30th of that. Tarkiv, 3 kavan, which is a half of 1 saw. Or chatzi targiv, 1.5 kavan, which is a quarter of 1 saw. Therefore, it says sodim any size. So my question is, why you tell me when it comes to the hole in the ground or the boulder that you have to redeem it full value? Why can't I use the same calculations like I use for the rest of the field, which is this 50 saw, and work out proportionate? You know why? Because it has to be a field that you can plant. Steachuz is a field that you can plant. We're talking about holes that are filled with water, and therefore skin. The lav bay zinio, you cannot plant on it, and because you cannot plant inside these boiras, that is the reason why it's and that is the reason why it's not treated like a steachuz. You have to redeem it for its true value, and I'll prove it to you. They can have approved you. The Tanya, it says, do me the slime. The 2 examples in this Bryce in the Mishnah here there is, it says, what do you call it? It says Nekoyim or slime. Now, what do we know about slime? You can't plant on a rock. So 2, you cannot plant in these holes. Shema Mina. Says the Gemara, if so, then what's the difference if it's 10 tvachim or 3 tvachim deep? If the problem is that you cannot plant there, why does it say that if the hole is 10 tvachim deep, then you cannot redeem it? This calculation, you have to deem it as true value. What's the difference? How deep it is? If the point is that it cannot be planted, even less than 10 tvachim deep, you should not be able to redeem it for the calculation of 50 slime. You should say the same thing. You cannot plant, so therefore pay for the full value. Says the Gemara, because once it's less than 10 tvachim, we look at it as if it's part of the ground. Hanu, we will say, Niga'ana da'ara mikra. There are crevices in the ground, there are cracks in the ground. We won't look at it as a pit. Or if it's a boulder, we say shadda da'aramikra, the ground, little mounds in the ground. We don't look at it as a separate entity. When do we look at it as a separate entity? Only if it's 10 tvachim deep, 10 tvachim high, and because then it's treated like a separate entity. Therefore, it's no longer treated like a steachuz. You want to redeem it from hegdish, pay its true value. Says the Gemara. If so, what about in our case? That's the case of hegdish. Is hachamai. Is our Mishnah, when our Mishnah says that if you sold a 30 saw and there were boulders there and pits there, it's not 10 tvachim deep. It's as if this land is no good, you got to find me another tract of land. Are we talking about also only if there was water inside the pit? Because it also uses the same comparison. It says here Nekoyim and it says Sloim. The Hachamai over here also. We say that if you had those things in, it's not a sale, and you have to find another tract of land. Are we talking about dafka these holes are filled with water, just like the boulders? And that's the problem. But if, let's say, you could plant in them, let's say there was no water, then maybe it would be considered part of the field, even though it's depressed 10 tvachim. How's it work? Hachamai, what's the din over here? Amar Papa says, Afa pisha emalai maim. In the case of the sale, even though it's not full of water, and you could plant there, it's still not a deal. My time of why? Ein adam roitze, a person does not want when he buys, invests in a property, in a land, in order to farm it. Sheyitin ma'oser b'makam echad. He's paying for one land. And and he has to treat it like two different properties. It's a lot of extra work to take the machinery and the implements and go down into the hole separately. Can't just go in a straight line back and forth, back and forth. He has to separately go down the hole and to work there and to plant there and to harvest there and to take care of it and prune it, whatever he has to do there. It's not what he wants. It's not ideal. So when it comes to a sale, we don't care if there's water there or not. Masculine Ravina, what do you mean you don't care? But do me just like Tony, the same calculation we made before, that we know that the holes had water in the Mishnah by Hegdish, because it compares it to stones. So our Mishnah also compares it to stone. So it should be the same thing. Masloim de la benezrinu, sloim you cannot plant. Avhani namid la benezrinu. So why do you say in our Mishnah also? The only time we say it's not a valid sale is if the holes have water in them. Says you want to know. In our Mishnah, the reason why, the logic is what our Papa said. And that is a person does not want to have so much extra work that he has to, work on the field on top and then work on the field below. And that's the logic. If that's the logic, who cares if there's water, if there's no water? So why does the Mishnah then compare it to a boulder? For a different reason. Kik Tani Duminus Loim, when it says that it's similar to a boulder, he wanted to say Apochus Mikan. He wanted to say that what happens if it's less than 10 Fachim, just like the boulder. That if it's less than 10 tefachim, even though a boulder you cannot grow on it, you cannot plant on it, but it's considered part of the land. So too, there's a hole in the ground. Even though there's a hole in the ground, if it's less than 10 tefachim, it's considered part of the ground, and it's not such a big effort to go ahead and to work with it, and therefore it's considered part of the sale.